I also needed to introduce my erstwhile um, colleague and compatriot, Gordian Gaita, who traditionally, over the last 26 years of the Asian Bankers Summit, co-hosts the summit together with me. Um, so I'm introducing him as a sideshow here, but you will see that he is going to be playing a very important role in the rest of this morning's session. It now gives me great pleasure in welcoming the Honorable Mr. Liew Tong, Deputy Minister of Finance. As I said in my opening remarks, he's an elected member of Parliament in this country, both at the state and the national level. He is a respected contributor to the entire political process in this country, but I respect him mostly for his intellectual input into building the architecture of what today is called Malaysia Mandani. He was first elected to Parliament in 2008. He was Deputy Defense Minister in the previous administration, Deputy Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry, and was appointed Deputy Minister of Finance in December 2025. But to introduce him only by his officers is to miss the reasons that he is very important and very interesting to all of us. The minister is one of the most thoughtful policy intellectuals in Malaysian public life, a long-time chairman of a think tank in Penang, a visiting senior fellow at the ISIS in Singapore, and a strategic director of his party's political caucus. He's a voracious reader and a writer and author of the fascinating book, Second Takeoff: Strategies for Malaysia's Economic Resurgence, in which he sets out his thesis that Malaysia has the rare opportunity in this moment of global realignment of a second economic takeoff to follow the first miracles that took place in the 1980s. But only if the country chooses good jobs, productivity gains, and capital input over the easier parts of speculation and rent collection. Interestingly enough, in all my years of tracking him, I've not heard very much about his input into banking, so today it will be a privilege to hear him. But he has been a principal voice behind the Consumer Credit Act, which came into force in March of this year, which finally brings BNPL debt collection and the unregulated credit parameters under a single new regulator. He's also been a strong public voice on the risks of property speculation, on medical inflation, which, by the way, is something that I'm passionate about because of the influence of insurance in escalating the cost of healthcare, not just in Malaysia, but across in many different developing countries. And the new MHIT pilot on fuel subsidy reforms and on the regional cooperation with countries like Singapore on the special economic zone and so on. So we have a lot to hear from him this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Honourable Minister, Mr. Liew Tong, Deputy Minister of Finance of Malaysia.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Dato Sri Khairul Saleh Ramli, Congressman Patrick McHenry, Kelvin Lam, and friends, fellow Malaysians, as well as our guests from overseas, Selamat Datang, welcome to Malaysia. I've decided to lower your expectation because I don't want to teach you how to be a better banker. I know that you will compete among yourself. But I would like to give this presentation a title. I call this the 2020s, Shaping the New Global Order from Asia. We are now more than half of this decade. And this decade has shown to us that it is far different from the preceding decades. And we are now seeing potentially once in 80-year alignment in the global order. I know bankers are used to chaos and crisis, but what is presented to us perhaps is more than what we were prepared for. There are at least 5 forces that are influencing what we are seeing today. First, a changing world order. There has been a US-led global order since the end of the Second World War, and particularly so after 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. Over the last 30 over years, it has been clear that the world is sustained by a US-led global order, and this global order was sustained by the US dollar's position, undisputed position as the what they call the center of gravity, by US as the consumer market of the last resort, and in many instances, the consumer market of the first choice for countries around the world, including very advanced countries such as Japan and Germany, which is still designing its economy on the basis of an export-led economy. And that export-led economy is having this idea that the US will continue to be the ultimate market. And thirdly, the US dominance was shaped by technological leadership of the United States. Now, these are all premises that are being challenged. Of course, it won't change from US leadership to immediately something else. I do not think that we are seeing the transition from the US power to another power immediately. And it is not necessarily also a G2 situation. It is not US-China or US-China-Russia. There are many other players, and what we are seeing now is unlike 1945, when there were less countries around the world, there were less middle power around the world, there were less developing countries around the world. We are now seeing many more actors, and each actor has its agency. And I think that is the difference. But anyhow, the changing global order is causing many, many challenges that we have to deal with. We are seeing a war on European continent. There is a war that has been in the Middle East, or what we call the West Asia here. And there are flashpoints in Asia, the Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Straits, and the South China Sea. The second force that is changing the world, and we are seeing this with a lot of, or we are experiencing it with a lot of hardship. The health crisis in multiple facets will affect our life in great ways. We have seen how COVID disrupted our life, disrupted supply chain, disrupted the way we do things. We have also now in Asia, we're also worried about an aging society. Japan's median age is 49 years old. And the rest of Asian societies are moving into the directions of an aging society, and that will have consequences for the health system and for other parts of the society. The third force that are going to cause a lot of upheavals is energy. We are seeing energy transition. We are seeing the potential of energy transition, but we are now also experiencing an energy crisis that is happening now. And fourth, climate challenges. Climate challenges will not go away. It will continue to be with us, and we are going to face a lot more climate challenges, especially in Southeast Asia, which is vulnerable to climate challenges. And fifth, technological transformation, especially with the advent of AI. This conference is coming with a theme, imagining the AI bank. we will have to deal with rapid changes and perhaps leapfrog, as well as rapid transformation of technology. And these are the forces that we have to deal with. These 5 forces influence and also created challenges to our financial landscape. It is reflected in inflation, post-COVID inflation that had to be dealt with, and that influenced interest rate. I wonder what Kelvin Walsh will do with inflation at close to 4% in April. And it also influenced dollars and the perception of dollars in the years to come. And there are shifts in potentially the war may shift financial center. We're not sure about the future of Dubai. And these are challenges that you and everyone else would have to handle. Last year, during the ASEAN chairmanship, I co-chaired a committee with my Indonesian counterpart, and we called the committee the ASEAN Geo-Economic Task Force. It was very difficult to introduce the idea of geoeconomics to our other colleagues because it was deemed unrelated. We have been trained to think that geopolitics and economics are separated, are not connected. But finally, we managed to convince our colleagues to continue with the work of a Geo-Economic Task Force thanks to President Donald Trump. Because of Liberation Day, and that forces everyone to think that we have to deal with geo-economic challenges. Now, our report has a very interesting title. I am not going to share the details of the report with you, but I want you to think about the perspective that we are trying to present. The report has a title that says, "This time it is different. ASEAN's agency in shaping the new global agenda." I was hoping to use the word new global order, but my colleagues say, come down. But I want to share with you this because I would like you to think that while we are dealing with chaos, we also would like to see bankers, leaders, community leaders having this sense of agency, that we can somehow shape the new global order to a certain extent. ASEAN is not the richest place in the world. Malaysia is not the richest country in the world. But each of us has some potential of shaping the future. And this generation of leaders, including this generation of black bankers, have a lot more challenge at hand to deal with compared to those who were before you. But this becomes an interesting opportunity. It becomes an interesting opportunity to see bankers acting as leaders. And at some point, I know this is not a word that you like. I know bankers don't like this word. But I would like to see bankers taking an activist attitude. Bankers can be at the forefront of shaping outcomes, and you know it. So the bankers of our time, apart from your usual jobs of shaping the velocity of money, I think you and all of us as leaders will now have to understand industries, understand supply chain, understand geopolitics, understand geoeconomics. We also have to understand materials. We have to understand critical minerals, without which a lot of other things will not happen. We have to understand logistics. We now have to learn how to think of oil or petrol in a different way and to understand how insurance are priced. And I think these are difficult challenges, but at the same time, these are areas in which it broadens our scope, it broadens the bankers' scopes, and I hope you will take these challenges in stride. Asia is likely to be the most important region that will see many more actions to come, both for the better and for worse. As I mentioned, there are flashpoints in Asia. We hope in the years to come, this flashpoint would not turn into wars. We hope we will have peace in Asia. But these are challenges that we have to deal with. I was in defense a while ago. I was the Deputy Defense Minister of Malaysia a while ago. And I think we cannot take things for granted. We cannot take things for granted, and we all have a role to ensure that there will be peace in Asia. There will not be, or at least we can contain the challenges in the Korean Peninsula, in the Taiwan Straits, and in South China Sea. And now there are worries about the Straits of Malacca. But actually, thinking about the Straits of Malacca, because I have been part of the public space or public life for quite a while. I was elected in 2008. Around 2010, there were many Chinese academics from China coming to talk to us, as well as US academics, talking about the challenge of the Straits of Malacca, and they call it the Malacca Dilemma. If you follow discussions among the international relations community in China, 15 years ago, the most important concern for the Chinese IR specialists was the Malacca Dilemma. But today you hardly hear it, except until the last 2 months. Partly because China has pivoted to a certain extent from its whole and entire dependence on oil. China is now a lot more energy resilient. And I often joke that China built EV not to solve environmental problem. China built EV and solar panel to solve geopolitical problem. China has coal. China produces coal, and it uses coal in order to power up energy and electricity to a certain extent, and that helps China to shape a more resilient geo-economic condition. And this is something that, to a certain extent, I think we should learn. Asia should transition its energy as much as possible. And Asia is also where sophisticated manufacturing and innovation happen. If you follow the stories of semiconductor, TSMC and its entire AI infrastructure and AI chips manufacturing is happening in this region. And there is a huge story that we can look at, and that I think is also where Asia matters. I note that your organization was founded 30 years ago, and 30 years ago, at this juncture, 30 years ago, in 1996, Asia was in euphoria. Asia was at that time in euphoria. Asia was at that time thinking that everything was possible, particularly Malaysia. And I would like to turn to say a few things about Malaysia before I end. Back in 1996, there was an euphoria in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, and to a lesser extent, the Philippines. At that point of time, it was deemed that Asia could do anything. And the Malaysian slogan at that time was called Malaysia Boleh, Malaysia can do. Eventually, it was seen very cynically. But that Asia euphoria, the source of that was actually in 1985 when the United States forced Japan to appreciate yen through the Plaza Accord. When the Plaza Accord was signed, by 1988, it was too expensive to export from Japan. And therefore, Japanese manufacturers moved and relocated to Singapore, Batam, Malaysia, and Thailand. And from there, their Koreans and Taiwanese suppliers came with them. So that period of time created Malaysia's first economic takeoff. Now, we have not seen that for the last 3 decades. especially when after China joined the WTO in 2001 until COVID-19, there was a period of 20 years that Malaysia was to a large extent bypassed. And for quite a while, Malaysia got into international news for the wrong reasons. But I think you can see now, especially after this energy crisis, Malaysia is getting into the international news for the right reason mostly, because we have the twin oil, we are relatively energy resilient, and we have a semiconductor story. While we are not the top of the food chain in semiconductor, but because of the AI boom and because of the semiconductor chips boom, we are part of the story. We are also now a democracy. Malaysia is now a democracy. 8 years ago, a one-party state that was in power for more than 60 years was defeated, and we are now in a mixed democracy. And we are the geopolitical middle in the region. If I were to describe Malaysia, I would say that Malaysia is in these three middle. The first middle is that Malaysia is the indispensable middle in the supply chain. And this, when you examine the semiconductor supply chain, it is very clear. We are the indispensable middle in the supply chain. We are not the highest end, but you take out Malaysia, even Detroit will not be able to produce car during COVID because of the factory shutdown in Malaysia. The second middle is that Malaysia is the geopolitical middle, and we choose to be the middle in geopolitics because we think that the middle ground is where most countries should be, and it shouldn't be a G2 world or it shouldn't be a G3 world. It should be a world shaped by the middle. And a world shaped by the middle, a world shaped by the middle powers is a world safer for everyone. Finally, the third middle is that Malaysia wants to be a middle-class society. We want to see a second takeoff, and we want to see a second takeoff helping us to create a strong middle class in Malaysia and ASEAN, because we are dealing with two challenges. One, all of us want to ensure that there is not going to be Gen Z protests, because we do have a young population, relatively. The second challenge is that we want to ensure that Malaysia grow rich, and Malaysia and ASEAN grow rich before we grow old. So with this, I want to thank you again for this opportunity. I would like to again stress that there are a lot that we can do together in Asia. Asia is probably the most important region in the years to come, and we should try to deal with all these challenges in strike, and dealing with all these challenges with vision, with determination, and with courage. And I hope to see more bankers, not just as bankers, but as people who will shape the future of Asia and the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The Minister has agreed to take on some questions and contribute to the dialogue with us. And there will be mics going around, so I'm going to allow maybe 2 questions up from the floor, so put up your hands when we get the chance. Minister, from your speech, I've got 2 very important questions to ask you. Firstly, what is the resource of the state to buffet the economy at this point in time when there are a number of challenges building up? Number 1, inflation is on the rise. Number 2, fuel prices because of the war in Iran. And related to these 2 elements, there is the spending power of the Malaysian public, and then, of course, you've got all the other aspects, pensions and healthcare and all of that. What is the resources or the ability of the state to help the people, navigate through what we're going through today?
I take a longer view to answer your short-term questions. Your questions about the short term. Number 1, I think Malaysia should attempt not just to continue to be a trading nation, but we must attempt to be a technology nation. Only when we are owners of technology, even if we do not own the top technology, we own the middle technology. With ownership of technology, we will be able to generate what some people call technological rents. We will be able to generate more income both for Malaysian companies and also for Malaysian engineers and workers. Now, through which we hope to shape a middle-class society. We hope to see more Malaysians becoming a middle class, and with more Malaysians becoming a middle class, with ASEAN becoming a stronger middle class market, we are hoping that in the long run, 20 years down the road, we do not have to depend on the United States as our consumer market of the first and last resort. Now, that is a difficult structural change that we have to deal with. There are short-term challenges. We will have to deal with petrol, we'll have to deal with subsidies, we'll have to deal with other challenges. Just briefly, my view about the current crisis, I think we should, particularly Malaysia, we should aim to build back better. We are entering into this crisis in a position of strength, but we also now know that this crisis, at least on the energy part, may take longer to recover to its pre-28th of February position. And therefore, we must attempt to think of emerging from this crisis much stronger. So those are the broad views to answer your question.
Now, you mentioned several times in your speech middle-class economy. And this is a question that is waiting to be asked because the policies are just becoming visible. A number of policies are now underway at the immigration level, at the wage level, to raise wages in Malaysia. For the longest time, you've been a low-cost manufacturer of a lot of things, and wages have been hollowed out because of your immigration policy. You've got a very liberal policy in bringing in low-cost wage from around of the region and so on. And now you are raising the bar. With higher wages, there are a number of other implications. The competitiveness of the country. Productivity gains have not been good at all in Malaysia. So in as much as you've been talking about Malaysia's role in the semiconductor industry and so on, it's not driven by domestic productivity growth. Where are you taking it? Where is the state taking this wage growth potential or ambition?
Wages in Malaysia is very often set in Singapore and Bangladesh.
Well done.
1.1 million Malaysians are working in Singapore at all levels, at the CEO level as well as the cleaner level. And we hire more than 2 million Bangladeshi, some documented, some documented, some undocumented. We as a nation will have to be very clear. We cannot continue. My constituency is next to Singapore. Every morning, 50,000 Malaysians are on motorbike entering Singapore, working as cheap labor. We will have to find a new equation. We will have to find a new equation in which we will have to encourage more Malaysian employers to pay better, while at the same time adopt a lot more technology. There are many tasks which can be performed by technology and doesn't necessarily have to be performed by human being. And we are probably in a sweet spot. We are in a sweet spot in the sense that if we automate a lot more, if we use a lot more technology, digitalization, and AI, we will actually see very rapid productivity gain. And because our economy is growing not just because of short-term cyclical changes, but also because of the big change I mentioned earlier, in which we see the diversification of production from China to this region. And that is going to help us to propel a longer-term change. And if we do not improve the conditions of the workers in this country, we will not have that productivity gain. I've been asked in Parliament and in many occasions, do Malaysia have a talent problem? My usual answer is Malaysia has no talent problem. Malaysia only have a pay problem. You pay 2/3 of Singapore pay, Malaysians in Singapore may want to come back to work. But that also means that we have to deal with the Bangladeshi equation at some point.
On the other side of the equation, hands up. Okay, that's one question there. Another one? Very quickly, yeah? Okay, another one there. Okay, good.
Minister, Steve Monahan from Human AI. Just a question. I'm a documented immigrant in Japan, so point taken. Your point on supply chain, I think, is a really important one. And we've spent a lot of time and money around the world optimizing supply chains. But the financial supply chain remains unchanged. Do you think banks should have a role in optimizing rather than just facilitating the financial supply chain?
This is very interesting. I think that, as I say, I look to bankers as activists. I look to bankers as shaper of the future world order, and I also think that bankers should play a role, a more activist role in changing the financial supply chain.
And the question there. Very quickly. Yeah.
Good morning. I am Hajar Rosma Ismail, formerly from MBank Islamic. I would like to refer to His Excellency's comments just now on banks taking on a more activist role. Yeah. So because typically banks operate looking at the best profit at the lowest risk. Yeah, that's how we operate. So in terms of taking on an activist role and looking at to shape the future of our country and also our industry, I would like to look at national interests. So typically, we would just finance and support whatever industries or clients that is according to our risk return parameters, yeah. Except for financing of weaponry, we don't have any other policies on what is our national interest, what are the industries for our national interest, especially what is against our national interest. So I would like to, I would appreciate having some feedback from Your Excellency whether financial regulators should actually come up with guidance to the financial industry on what is not in our national industry.
Very interesting
Thank
questions from a practitioner. I think broadly, even without a guidance, the bankers should now look at risk in a more holistic manner. The bankers should now look at geopolitical risks, geo-economic challenges, and to finance at the least resilience, both supply chain resilience and also other form of resilience, including climate resilience and perhaps other forms of resilience. We have moved away from a just-in-time world to a just-in-case world. We have moved away from thinking about efficiency to now thinking of resilience. And that, with or without guidance from the central bankers, I think it should be fundamental in our thinking about the 2020s and beyond. Now, of course, beyond that, whether we should redefine what is national interest, what is not a national interest, I think that is something debatable. But nonetheless, the years to come will force all of us to deal with risk in its broadest possible sense, and also to deal with building resilience as a core business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Liew. I tried to pin you down on current issues that Malaysia faces, but you kept pulling us back into the art of the long view. Take the longer perspective in terms of what you want this country to be eventually. And I think that by doing that, you're asking us to focus on the big picture and on the constructional elements, the things that we need to work on in building. And Malaysia is in a good position today because you have the resources and you have the time to build that long road or long structure. So thank you very much for joining us this morning.